Hello, I'm the webinar organiser, Louise King. Thank you for joining today's presentation entitled Practical Environmental Management. Today's presenter is Keith Whitehead, a Senior Consultant on Environmental Management at the British Safety Council. Before we get started, I would like to explain a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's session. You have joined today's webinar listening through your computer system, speaker system by default. If you'd like to call in using your phone, just locate your audio pane and select Use Telephone. The dial-in information and access code will then be displayed. You also have the ability to ask questions using your question pane. Simply type in your question and click Send. At the end of the presentation, we'll respond to your questions. If we don't have time to respond to all of them, we will answer remaining questions via email after the session. I will now pass you over to Keith to present today's webinar.
Okay, thank you, Louise. I'll just, and good afternoon, everybody. I'll just share my screen with you here. There you go. So, hello, the webinar. Yes, okay, so we're going to be talking today around the 14001 family of standards, a little bit of a heads up, some of the guidance documentation. So the webinar content is going to be split into three. I'll just talk a little bit about the context of this webinar and why we've chosen it, or why we consider it's important for our members and guests. And then I'll give you a heads up around some of the 14001 series. I won't be doing them all by any means, but I'll just give you some of the main ones and some of the other supporting standards which can help you to improve your environmental performance and to enhance your 14001 system. And like Louise just mentioned there, if there's any questions at the end, we can field them. And, so please use the question methodology that Louise just explained there. Right, so why do we consider this to be an important topic? Okay, so been at the British Safety Council now for 15 years and engaging with many of our members in all aspects of environmental management. Often strikes us that when we go to see companies who have got 14001, that they're not often actually aware that these other standards and guidance documents exist. I mean, they're happy with 14001 and they use it to the best of their ability. But the other standards, the other guidance is an area where we often like to see improvements, I suppose, which leads to the second point that you can see there. Now, I know there's many members on the webinar today who have undertaken our 5-star environmental audit, and I recognise some of the names personally. So those who have actually undertaken this best practice audit will know that some of the question sets and some of the discussions that we have all around how they utilise these other standards and other guidance to improve their environmental performance. So 14001-2015 was published a few weeks ago. And again, several of these, the current standards and current guidance link very nicely with 2015 standard to help to improve it. And there's a nudge and a wink actually in the new standard towards these other supporting documents. Okay, so I guess the key thing is going to help you maximize your environmental performance anyway, and it will always improve your environmental management system if you do engage with specific guidance documents, standards which are applicable to your organisation. And again, a nod and a wink to IEMA accredited courses. It's actually part of the IEMA skills map that a HSE, an environmental professional, is aware of these other management tools, are aware of these other standards and guidance. Not in detail, but certainly be aware that they exist. And the IEMA qualification, the IEMA certification, it's also part of one of the learning outcomes that you can be questioned upon, the benefits and cons of specific environmental management tools. So, you may be one or all of those. So let's just go into the presentation then and just open up some of the standards and describe them to you. Okay, well, those of you know ISO Technical Committee 207 deals with environmental management standards under these specific headings. There are a few more, but I just thought I'd highlight these specific areas, and I'm going to use these as headings to describe specific standards and guidance under each one of them that I think would be useful as an environmental or health and safety environmental practitioner to be aware of. I'm not suggesting you go out and buy them all because we know they're expensive, but certainly I think you can utilize them, look at them, and do some research around them. If you're not going to go out and purchase them directly. So I'll talk about environmental management systems, some terms and definitions, guidance around that, how to conduct or what that guidance document you would utilize for carrying out environmental audits, even health and safety audits, to be honest with you. Environmental investigations, we'll look at environmental performance evaluation, guidance. Those of you who are manufacturing and have got products with environmental labels or claims, again, just a heads up about what specific guidance documents are available there. Lifecycle assessment, one of the new requirements of 14,001/2015 is to think about this concept. So we'll look at LCA, lifecycle assessment. You can't do enough communication about environmental or EHS within the organisation. It's a conversation I have regularly with our members about how to improve communication, how to see it's working and effective. So again, there's some guidance there. And some of you are obligated, legally obligated to measure greenhouse gases. Some of you do it voluntarily. Some of you have not even started, no doubt. Again, just a nod and a wink there to the specific ISO guidance around greenhouse gas management. So let's start with environmental management systems then. Okay, so 14,001 is really the sort of skeletal document, really. If you want to look at the mother document, I suppose you can call it that, related to 14,001, it's a nod and a wink to 14,004. Okay, this is a bigger document, much more descriptive about how to implement 14,001. It does provide guidance on how to establish it, how to implement it on site, how to maintain the system and improve it. And it's in a lot more detail. So again, I always say to companies who show me 14,001 document, I always say to them during 5-star audit, can I see 14,004 as well, so you understand the links between that. So it will be updated, it'll have to be updated to fall in line with 14,001/2015. Because of the way it has changed. Those of you who are aware of the change, we do have a webinar on our web page where Howard Dawes talks about that specific aspect, so I can point you to that. But it will have to fall in line. So 14,004 is one that I would expect you to be, if you've got a certification, if you've got 14,001, that you certainly be aware of and understand the wider background to it. So, from my sins, I go all over the world doing environmental audits, and we like to see, or we like to understand, that everyone talks the same language where we go. And I know on the webinar here we've got members from the Middle East and from India, this is the specific guidance document. It's all about environmental management vocabulary, and it's 14,050. So it just sets out specific terms relating to things like environmental management system. So it describes organisation, it describes risk, it describes what aspects and impacts are, and it's defined under this particular guidance document. In auditing as well, it talks about auditing personnel and auditing documentation and outcomes. So again, if you're carrying out audits and you're developing audit programs, it's nice to lean on this specific guidance document so that you're all following the same terms and technologies. Lifecycle assessment, again, it talks about product systems and unit processes and functional units and all sorts of stuff in there. So again, it's almost like a dictionary of these terms, really, what they mean. And under environmental labelling as well, it talks about claims and logos and what what's described under declaration. So again, there's terms and definitions in there. So again, while you might not have it in your top drawer or in your little library, it is something that we do point people towards, our members towards, so they have an understanding that everything's a standard, even the terms and definitions. Okay, so I know you probably carry out environmental audits either internally or you're externally audited by a third party or even a second party. And again, you may have audit programs. The standard you can see in front of you here, why not being 14,001, is a supporting standard. Again, it's 19,011. It's about auditing quality and environmental management systems, or any management system, to be honest with you, even health and safety ones. And it provides an explanation on the principles of auditing. Again, if you have your own internal audit, it's nice to see this document about how an audit should actually be managed, how to manage an audit program, what is required, all the specific stages. Just gives you a sort of a heads up really on what audits are. I mean, I come across lots of internal auditings, and some of them follow this very, very closely. Other companies or other members, like I said before in the introduction slide, I've never heard of it. So again, if you want to develop an audit program and how to conduct internal audits, or how to even use it to qualify and quantify and test your certification bodies as well. We have some members who have been using it recently in that context. And it gives advice on the competence and how you evaluate auditors. So a nice guidance document really about how to manage the whole audit program. And again, during the 5-star audit process that we do, we like to see links that those world-class companies are utilizing these specific guidances to supplement their 14,001. Okay, an area that I personally worked in for many years is 14,015, which is called the Environmental Assessment of Sites and Organizations. It's all about identifying, ultimately at the end of the day, it's about identifying your liabilities there, a process of how you go about looking at your environmental aspects, looking at environmental issues and determining where appropriate in this context, your business consequences. Now, for many people at top management, so CEOs, that means money essentially and liabilities. You'll have different liabilities associated with your business. Unfortunately, many companies only know about their liabilities when it's too late. If they're being sold or bought, then liabilities come to the forefront. But this actual document can give you a process that you can follow now to identify your liabilities in a very structured manner. Okay, so 14,031 then comes under environmental performance evaluation. Okay, so those of you with 14,001 here, you'll all have objectives and targets, I'm sure you have, or you need to. And again, this particular guidance sort of pushes it a step further really about how you can monitor and measure your objectives and targets, that you're meeting them, that you're following them, and you can prove to an external auditor of the KPIs that you're using. Okay, so technically we call them environmental performance indicators, but we all know, let's call them key performance indicators, and they're broken down into 3 different types. So we have management performance indicators, so these are things like number of audits, finances that are put towards environmental improvement programs, number of inspections, staff training, all the sort of management side of things. Then we have operational performance indicators. I mean, you can think of these as volumes and weights and kilowatt hours per ton of product, litres of water per X number of whatever, contaminants in a discharge consent. So there's all sorts of operational performance indicators that you can utilise as well. And some of the bigger industries, in petrochemical, that jumps immediately to mind for me from my own recent experience, they have environmental condition indicators at a local level, regional level, national, even global. I mean, ones that I mainly come across have been local. So, for example, levels of contaminants in the marine environment near a discharge outfall would be an example of a condition indicator. The level of groundwater beneath the site, contaminants in the groundwater, they're all condition indicators. So, I mean, this standard is worth getting, I suppose. If there's one I would suggest that you consider, would be this one, because it gives a whole range of examples. And there is a supporting standard to this. I've not put it in here, 32, ISO 40032, which gives a practical example of how it's applied. I think it's one of the only guidance documents where there's a case study in it. That's 40032. But again, we like to see our 5-star companies. When I talk about objectives and targets, and we talk about key performance indicators, the next question we always ask is, can you show us your OPIs, MPIs, or ECIs, and how you're managing it? Okay, so moving on then to a bit more manufacturing products. Those of the companies which are wishing to gain an environmental label or make some sort of environmental declaration on their product, a claim, or it's free from, or has specific environmental benefits. They follow they should be following the ISO 14020 series of standards and guidance documents. These really provide, like it says, a recognized and credible set of benchmarks about how you can prepare for an environmental label on your product or to make some sort of green claim. I mean, there is the UK Green Claims Code, which you can download from, I think, the DEFRA government website. But essentially, it all follows back to this series of standards, 20 standards. And if you ever go shopping with me, unfortunately, you would see I often hang around looking at environmental labels on products and declarations, and always thinking that this series of standards lies behind it. Like there they are on a little table. 40,020, that's just general principles about both logos and claims, that they have to be accurate. You can't really, they have to be verifiable always, externally and independently required, and also be relevant to the product itself. 14,021. This is all around claims, making environmental claims, and there's a lot of disinformation out there, or there has been in the last 10 years, about products making sort of ridiculous claims, really, but try to be brought into following this particular guidance document 14,021 sets out what you can and what you cannot say on a product. Okay, so 14,024 is really related to what we call Type 1 logos. So if you've seen the EU Eco label, if you've seen the Forest Stewardship Council, Marine Stewardship Council, these sort of labels, they give permission, they certify the company which makes the product that they have to follow certain practices, certain information, certain procedures in order then to be able to put that stamp, that label on their product. And 14,024 lies behind those particular logos. Okay, so slightly linked to eco-labeling is Lifecycle Assessment, sometimes called cradle to grave, which is it is used in businesses, mainly manufacturing. They do what they call gate to gate life cycle assessments. So the product coming in the gate goes through obviously a series of processes and comes out the gate at the other end as a product. So a lot of companies look at the material flow within that within that process. And enough, there is a standard around that as well, I'll highlight later on. But 14,040 gives you just the principles and framework of conducting a life cycle assessment for your product. And 14,044 is the specific how to do it, the requirements and how to, the guidelines. It sort of sets out a 4-stage process. Some of you may be using it, be aware of it, about the goal and scope of a product. You know, what's in and outside. So if I was doing a life cycle assessment of a paper cup, what I would be including in that paper cup, how far down its life cycle do I go, how far up up to the end of life do I go, what's in and out, what am I measuring, what aspects, is it energy, water, there's a whole host of things that you define at the goal and scope stage. Obviously then I go into the inventory stage, which is gathering the data, so I have to gather the data to meet the requirements of what I've said I'm going to do. So I've got to turn that though into an impact, so that's the third stage you can see there. I've got to turn my kilowatt hours into an impact assessment, and ultimately what I'm trying to do is identify where in the process, either cradle to grave or gate to gate, which part of the process has the greatest environmental impact, and that's the interpretation phase. I can report it publicly or internally. Okay, but always critically review life cycle assessments, because they're not completely and utterly. There are some critics of it, but ultimately it's the right thing to be doing, to be thinking. So much so that at the bottom point there, you can see 14,001, 2015. There is now a sort of requirement really in your aspects and looking at your organisational risks and opportunities to actually use life cycle thinking on any products that you make or any services that you outsource, or any products that you procure, or all your raw materials. So it is starting to get you to think out it. You may be aware that from average business globally, 80% of the environmental impact of a business is generally outside of its boundary. It's in its supply chain. So it's sort of pointing to not knowing until you get to start thinking about LCA in all the things that you do. Okay, I mentioned earlier on, you can't ever communicate enough the environmental message, either ongoing or however you do it with EHS inductions or ongoing EHS initiatives. And I often get asked during environmental audits and during my training is, how do other businesses communicate the environmental message? How do they do it? And the short answer for those organisations who are the very high scorers within 5-star environmental audits is they've got a copy of 14,063, and they utilise that in developing communication strategies, developing an environmental communication policy, some of the practical things that they can do, verbal, written communication, visual communication methodologies, it gives you examples of what you can do and how you can do it. And again, for those of you 14,001 and we're doing the transition to 2015, clause 7.4 of the new standard is all around communication, specifically broken down into what you do internally and also what you do externally. I think there's a much more, there's a much more, a bigger requirement for businesses to be a bit more transparent and to be able to communicate the environmental or health, safety and environmental message a little bit more, clearly in a bit more of a structured manner. So again, you utilise this guidance documentation, it might give you some ideas on what you can do to achieve that. Some of you on the webinar here, I know, can see the list, are obligated to legally report greenhouse gases. Some of you are doing it voluntary. Some of you are not doing it at all, no doubt. But whatever stage you're at, I think looking at ISO 14064, parts 1, 2 and 3, this is all around guidance on how an organisation can quantify and report your greenhouse gas emissions. And removals is techniques, obviously, to do it. It says exactly on the tin there, greenhouse gas removals from your operations. Okay, so again, it's broken into three parts there, 40,064. Part one looks at really organisational level quantification, reporting of greenhouse gas emissions for those businesses which, a bit larger businesses with multiple sites and have an organisational requirement to do so to reduce greenhouse gases. Part two looks at really sort of more site-based project level quantification, monitoring and reporting of greenhouse gases. So for smaller sites, single sites, individual projects, part two would be the one to lean on. And part three is all around validation and how you verify your greenhouse gas measurements, and there's assertions here, okay, around that. So, if you're reporting it already, great, I'm sure you already know this standard. If you're doing it voluntary, you can go here and it gives you ideas on how to do it. And if you want to do it and you feel you should be monitoring your greenhouse gases and your energy, and again, this gives you some practical information about how you can do that. Okay, so let's have a look at some just other supporting standards then very quickly that I think you should be pointed towards. ISO 31000 is the risk management standard and guidance. It's not just environment, it's all sorts of risk for the business, and it can be applied to any type of risk. So in the context of what we want, it's environment, it could be health and safety, it could be finance, it could be all sorts of business risks, positive and negative. I think that's the thing. And so again, 14,001, 2015, the change, that standard is now very risk-based, and in fact there is a heavy leaning. If you get this standard or you read 31,000, you will instantly see it's been reflected in the new standard, particularly under clause 4.1, which is understanding your organisation and its context. And there's many aspects of that, from technological, political, cultural, social aspects, but from an environmental viewpoint, there's a nod and a wink there for you to start thinking about how will climate change affect your business? How is it affecting your business? In logistics, in finances, in property, in health and safety of staff, and also resource depletion. We have some members that we've been talking to recently who are physically going to move their operations because they're in an area of the UK where simply there's not enough water, and they've been hit by drought conditions in the last 10 years, so they're going to have to move their operations to somewhere where they don't have that vulnerability. Okay, and there are opportunities by doing that as well. So, the new standard 31,000, very risk-based. Have a look at it. Those of you who use a lot of energy, ISO 50001 is the energy management standard based on the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, where it's about establishing, implementing, maintaining and improving your energy management system. It's all about saving money at the end of the day. Knowing, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So it's all about measuring your energy, having plans in place, doing it, implementing energy minimization initiatives, checking that what you're doing is working, and then acting upon the results. Okay, those who have 50,001 can circumnavigate the ESOS regulations. That the ESOS is not needed if you've got 50,001. Okay, but it is a systematic approach. So whether you're utilizing it as a certified standard or you just want to save energy in your own SME business, the processes are actually the same. So again, 50,001 gives you that structured approach. And then last two slides then for me, just to show you that there are other supporting standards which also have an environmental connotations. And what I chose here just to show you the range is ISO 20121, which is all about event sustainability management systems. Now I know a couple of our members globally, those who run some internal large-scale events for their internally and also for external parties as well. They've been utilising this guidance document about how can they run the event more sustainable. And that includes choosing the venue, where the venue is it the right area, is it accessible, what operating procedures do we have to run the event, what do we buy, what products are we buying in, from food to stationery, to, is that from some more sustainable resources. So there's a transport links to the site. So again, this is a management system which can be utilised. I think London Olympics use this. I think Glastonbury look at this as well. So it is. I just wanted to highlight that there are lots of other specific standards. And lastly, then, just to show that I could go on all day, but I won't, is that there are other standards to be aware of. 14,045 there looks at eco-efficiency of product systems. We link to LCA there, such as material flow cost accounting. That's being very detailed about a product, the goods in and goods out, about how you can look at the cost accounting in that, 14,051. Nowadays, embedded carbon and the carbon and water footprint of products is also being looked at by many companies globally. So 14,067 if you want to look at carbon footprinting, and 14,046 if you're interested in water footprint of your products. These are areas you can go to. There's always the good old British standard, 8900 there, that gives you some general guidance on managing sustainable development within your organisation and what it means to an organisation. So again, if you want to go down that route, sustainability, sustainable development, have a look at that one. And there's also the good old BS 8555 Project Acorn, which is around environmental management systems. Again, it's just a phased implementation of environmental management system for SMEs. The model is still out there, you can still use it. It means you don't have to do everything all at once to get a 14,001 accreditation. You can do it in nice phased steps, and that's BS 8555, so SMEs. Right, so there's a quick run through some of the 14,000 family and some supporting guidelines. Like I say, it's not them all. It's just some of the ones that when we have 5-star audits, when we're having discussion, when I'm training on the IUMA cert, these are the things we talk about. These are the standards and guidance I would like to see in my ideal world that I live in. EHS professionals being able to talk this language around the desk to me. So we looked at environmental management systems there, 14,040. Terms and definitions is 14,063. Environmental auditing is 19,011 and the processes around it. Looking at liabilities is environmental investigations, that's 14,015. Environmental performance evaluation to your objectives and targets is 14,031. Environmental labels on products and claims is 14,020 series. Life begins at 40, so Lifecycle Assessment is ISO 14,040. Communicating the environmental messages and getting some examples and best practices, 14,063. And greenhouse gases is measuring and quantify them, that's 14,064. So apologies for a brief run through, but hopefully, giving you a heads up there that the 14,000, I always see 14,001 as almost like it's nice to have, and it's almost like an empty house, but to fill the 14,001 house up with furniture, you should be looking at 30 or 40,031, 14,015, 63, so on and so forth. So on that note then, I will hand back over to Louise, and if anyone has any questions, I will try and answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. That was very interesting. Thank you. We do have a few questions. The first being from Chidu Bear. What practical ways can organisations move from compliance-driven certification environmental management systems to actual proactive environmental management systems procedures based from a developing country?
Oh, right, okay, so
I do lots of audits in developing countries in India. So as I understand the question then, I always say the very basic thing that you must have is being, you say, compliant, so legally compliant. And then if you look at the path towards sustainability, if you look at the models of towards sustainability, that's the very basic step, step one. Step two would be implementing an environmental management system such as 14001, and again, you could argue that is compliance, obviously, but it's beyond compliance a little bit as well. So that would be the next step of moving towards this goal of being more sustainable. But often they're very operational, they're very site-based. The next step for me would be for utilising all these other standards, all these other guidance documentation I've just talked about to add value to your certification. That would be, for me, step three. Step four, and I think 14001 2015 has been designed to sort of do this, to be honest with you, and that is to make your environmental management system, your objectives and targets, much more embedded in your business strategy going forward. So it sort of has to be in the business strategy. Also, leadership must be being shown. There must be much more examples and proactive engagement with the leaders of your organization. And that would be, for me, one of the next step. After that, then we move into all things like sustainability tools. So you can start looking at all the global reporting initiatives, so being transparent, reporting globally, using all the social, environmental and economic indicators, and maybe engaging in other standards as well, and just being seen as a transparent. So there is a model there. I can sort of see it in my head how it works, from basically just being legally compliant to ultimately environmental management being how you do business.
Great, thank you, Keith. Another question is from Paul. Will I need to use ISO 14040 to satisfy the new requirements of 14001 2015 in life cycle thinking?
Thanks, Paul. The short answer there is no, you don't, mate, to be honest with you. But what you need to do, I think, it's asking you to think about your outsourced products, your procurement. It's asking you to think in a life cycle, in a way of life cycle thinking. So why you don't have to do a full, I don't know if you're from a manufacturing organisation, why you don't have to do a full life cycle assessment on your products. I think understanding the model I explained earlier on, goal and scope, inventory, impact, I think that would be something, one, you can get your head around to understand that's how a life cycle is undertaken, and maybe engage, maybe I think you should engage with your key suppliers and start to get their ideas about, the supply chain that you operate within. Do they have any their own information, their own environmental goals, and maybe they have done LCAs. And I think that's what ultimately this standard is asking, the new standard is trying to get you to do, is just think that 80% of your environmental impact is outside of your organisation, so get the conversations going in your supply chain. But no, you don't have to do a 14040 full assessment on your, you can if you want to, but you don't have to.
Thank you. Our last question for today is from Julia. She asks, how can I use ISO 14015 to help me understand environmental liabilities we have?
Okay, how can you use 14015? Okay, so it's often used, 14015, by environmental consultants and due diligence consultants in identifying your current and historical liabilities. So it is a stepped process. So to be honest with you, Julie, what I would suggest you do is just have a look at it. It basically follows a 3-stage process, and I think what I would expect from yourself, your organisation, if you're the EHS manager, is to have actually done a phase 1. In fact, phase 1 is all about identifying the environmental sensitivity of your site. Okay, so what does that mean in practice then? So, you know, if I asked you the question, if I came to your site and said, what is the environmental sensitivity of your site? I would expect you to have done what they call a phase 1. So looked at have an evidence pack of all the groundwater on your site, all the geology, all the SSSIs or sites of science, special scientific interest, all ecology, what businesses are around you, who can you affect and who can they affect you, understanding about soil types. There's so much you can do, and this is actually set out of what a phase 1 environmental sensitivity pack would look like. So I think that's how you would engage with it. You can also get historical maps and see what was on your site before, and because there's lots of historical contamination, particularly here in the UK. Like I say, for most businesses that I worked in and with a lot, it was too late when they were being sold. They should have identified their environmental sensitivity and historical contamination long before we got to that point. Phase 2 is really about understanding site investigations, so the actual physiochemical methodologies that are utilised to assess any contamination. I wouldn't expect you to engage with that, but again, this particular guidance gives you information on what techniques are used. And phase 3 is all about remediation. But hopefully, if I can answer your question, it will just help you to do a phase 1 environmental sensitivity assessment of your organisation.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you. Okay, that's all the questions we have time for today. I'm sorry if we haven't been able to answer your question. If you're keen for an answer, please do email webinar@britsafe.org and we will respond later on today. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Keith, and everyone, please have a lovely afternoon. Thanks. Goodbye.